Jamal Khashoggi obviously has been missing. He is presumed to have been killed. That is what the Turkish government is saying the evidence points to. And so now let's talk about how various groups have reacted to it. So we've said that the Saudi government obviously denies it. You can believe that if you wish. They're certainly allowed to say that. I would say that the statements they've put out, they seem similar to the statements that the Russian government put out after the Skripal killings, which turned out to be ridiculous. It turned out that in the end, they weren't tourists that did the poisoning. They were actually intelligence officers. We're supposed to pretend that that's not the case. So they're saying that they didn't do it. And then you have other reactions. So inside of the US government, Lindsey Graham said Wednesday that, quote, there would be hell to pay if he had been killed by the Saudi government. And specifically said, I've never been more disturbed than I am right now. Even more so than during the Kavanaugh hearings. If this man was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, that would cross every line of normality in the international community. And it is not the role of the Saudi government to cross lines of normality in the international community. It is Trump's role. He's supposed to be doing that. So look, he is saying there will be hell to pay. Of course, he's not in charge. Donald Trump is in charge. So how does Donald Trump respond to this? We've got a couple of clips. Here's the first.
I am concerned about it. I don't like hearing about it. And hopefully that will sort itself out. Right now, nobody knows anything about it, but there's some pretty bad stories going around. I do not like it.
So he says, I hope it sorts itself out, and says nobody knows anything about it. We didn't have as many details when he said that as we do now, but people knew some things about it at that time. So it seemed almost like a Trump trial balloon to see, can I just completely ignore this? And will that be acceptable? Now there's follow-up questions later on as we get more information and all that. So here is another reporter talking to him.
Lindsey Graham says there will be hell to pay if Saudis are in fact responsible. Do you share that view?
Well, and Lindsey can speak for himself, but this is a bad situation. We cannot let this happen. To reporters, to anybody, we can't let this happen. And we're going to get to the bottom of it, okay? I'd rather not say, but at a very high level, the highest level. Let me say this, it's the highest level, okay? Yeah.
You mentioned that you talked to
more than once.
You had mentioned that you spoke to King Salman, so I mean.
Well, I do anyway, and I've always found him to be a fine man. We've had a very good relationship. I'm not happy about this. We have to see what happens. You know, we have to see what happens. Nobody knows what happened yet. They don't know over there.
Yeah, the Saudis they don't know, and he's a fine man. So if they don't know, I mean, how could we ever know? There were a lot of issues with what he said there. First of all, Lindsey Graham says there will be hell to pay. He says he can speak for himself. So I don't want to sign on to the idea that there will be hell to pay or consequences or anything like that. This shouldn't happen to reporters. It shouldn't happen to anyone. You could just say it shouldn't happen to anyone. You don't have to weirdly put reporters in a different category as if you're even including reporters. How merciful of you to do that. And he keeps saying we have to find out. We have to find out. Whatever. I've talked to him. He's a good man. Why are you stressing that he's a good man? Like he's obviously the lead suspect in this. The Turkish government is saying that they have evidence that it was passed down from the highest levels of the Saudi government. But we understand why. He doesn't want to do anything about it. Do you honestly believe that he cares about the killing of any reporter, let alone this reporter in particular, and that he'd be willing to jeopardize his relationship with the Saudi government? We're selling them more than $100 billion of weapons. What are we going to cancel that because they start murdering journalists around the world? That's not the case.
Yeah. So, John, I don't know why you're worried, because our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said that he has asked the Saudis to look into this. Oh, well, okay, then I guess problem solved.
Yeah.
Hey, can you guys look into whether you guys dismembered a journalist who had spoken ill of your leader? And don't worry about your leader and the fact that he might dismember people who are critical of him. Just look into it anyway. Yeah. Well, that's likely to be a very fair investigation.
Sort of related to that, I read that Mike Pence is saying that they're open to the possibility of sending the FBI to investigate. Although to be fair, the investigation is probably going to be limited in scope and time.
Yeah.
And they're not going to interview any of the people involved.
Yes. A lot of people have asked to be interviewed, but they just won't do it.
Yeah.
Pence went on to say, in all seriousness, this is a direct quote, will continue to express the genuine concern of the American people for this Saudi Arabian journalist. Notice two important political words in there. Like genuine concern of the American people. Why would it be anything other than genuine? It's like saying that's the kind of thing you say when you're not genuine, right? Yeah. Like we are genuinely concerned. But much more importantly, for this Saudi Arabian journalist.
Yeah.
In other words, he's not really American. I mean, he lived in America, he wrote for the Washington Post, but he was just a resident of the US, not a national of the US. He's a Saudi Arabian journalist. You want us to do something? You want us to jeopardize defense contracts? That's real money that goes into our pockets eventually through campaign donations, just because they dismembered a guy who worked for the Washington Post.
Technically, he worked for the failing Washington Post.
Yeah.
To be clear. Also, by the way, it is reporting, I think the New York Times, it could be the Guardian, I apologize, so feel free to look that up. But US officials are said to have intercepted communications between Saudi officials about kidnapping Jamal Khashoggi.
Now that's actually the worst part of it, because that means we knew that it could happen and we didn't warn him. And that is disastrous. I mean, it's one thing to do a cover-up, which is hideous after the fact. And I know moneyed interests are gonna wanna, whether it's the contractors, the oil companies, et cetera, they're gonna wanna keep business flowing. But to know ahead of time that they might kill the guy and not tell him, wow. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
So I'd ask the FBI to investigate that. So, and that is under our control. Unfortunately, of course, the US government, as well as the Saudi government, is not going to honestly investigate itself. Look, if you're wondering why go to all these lengths if you're the Saudi government to kill this guy, because it's taking a risk. I mean, this Mohammed bin Salman is a huge risk taker, kidnapping foreign leaders, trying to start wars, et cetera, but, and actually starting a terrible one in Yemen. But this seems pretty extreme. Well, Khashoggi there's two huge strikes against him. One is he was an insider in the Saudi royal court earlier, and he turned on them. Ooh, they don't like that, okay? So they don't like that for a couple of reasons. One, you betrayed us, right? And number two, he might have more information about what they've done. Okay, so he's gotta go. And then secondarily, he was a particularly fierce critic of Crown Prince Mohammed, okay? So that's maybe a personal betrayal that Mohammed bin Salman feels. And so here's a guy who does not have much boundaries, obviously trying to starve and kill a lot of the citizens in Yemen as we speak. And by the way, the US government is helping him to do that. We provide refueling for their planes so they can do more bombings. We provide intelligence. Such as it is, they recently bombed a school bus full of children and killed all of them. And so we have a deal here with these guys, and we've had a deal with the Saudis for a long time, even as they have done outrageous things against us over and over and over again. So the one that's talked about a lot, of course, is 9/11. 15 out of the 19 hijackers were Saudis. Obviously, Bin Laden was a Saudi, and he was a Saudi royal, financed by other Saudis as well. But the one that's not talked about enough is, and whenever it's inconvenient for the establishment, things get buried, is that the Saudis, there was excellent reporting showing that the Saudis mainly funded the Sunni insurgency against us in Iraq. That killed hundreds, maybe thousands of our troops. But hey, they've got cheap oil. So, and they buy planes and weapons from us, and they provide us oil. So they murder our soldiers in Iraq, and they pay for that murder. What's the big deal, right? So now, finally, you've got to look at what's happening geopolitically behind the scenes as well, because there's what you see on the surface, and there's what's underneath. So underneath, the Saudis are allies with us and Israel. Okay. The Turks lately have been in more of an alliance with Qatar, and Qatar has been feuding with Saudi Arabia and Dubai. So if the Turks were not feuding with the Saudis, would we have such a big trove of evidence from the Turkish government about the videos showing the guy going in but not coming out? Would they be making as big a deal about this? Maybe not, okay? Yeah. So that's on one side. Now, the other thing is, I'm surprised here that the Saudis are catching this much flack, especially here in America and by Republicans. Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, et cetera, with what appears to be real anger in this case. I've never seen them be genuine in my life. So I wonder if the Saudi relationship with Israel has soured in some way. And so if that happens, sometimes people are told, yeah, it's green light. You could now finally call the Saudis anything you like, okay? Or if the Saudis stop paying their bills to the lobbyists, okay, here in America. Or none of those things happen. This was truly outrageous. But a week from now, the lobbyists will call the senators, and then differently, Netanyahu and his right-wing government will call the senators and go, no, we're done with this investigation. Let's move on.
Well, Trump said Lindsey Graham can speak for himself.
Yeah.
He didn't want to sign on to it.
So there's a number of different factors. There's no one simple explanation, but the Saudis have a lot of friends here in America through questionable alliances and questionable money spent here.
Yeah.
So will those guys rally to their defense and kind of basically try to get past this within a week or so? If they don't, and the press keeps talking about it, and the Republicans keep harping on it, then we might have a break in the alliance.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah, what I wonder is, will this newfound concern amongst people like Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham be echoed by, look, is Fox News gonna turn on Saudi Arabia? I mean, look, if this happened under Obama, they'd be attacking Obama's weakness. Why isn't he checking Saudi Arabia and all that? But Trump likes Saudi Arabia, and so they've perfectly fallen in line there. And one other thing complicating at least a little bit in terms of perhaps the FBI getting involved or working with Turkey is that, look, Turkey's got its own problems with increasing authoritarianism, their own crackdowns and repression on a number of different groups. That doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't true here, but it does complicate it at least to some extent.
Yeah, and so that's why one of the things we try to do for you guys here on the program is to give you context. And it's not a black and white world, and you have to not only look at what's happening in the news, but what might be happening behind the scenes. What's the motivation of the Turkish government, the US government, Saudi government, et cetera. And so this is a complicated story in that sense. It's simple in that it seems that there is overwhelming evidence that they killed this journalist. And whether that's ever proven, goes to court, or has any consequences is what we don't know yet. Like what you see? Click the subscribe button below, and don't forget to ring the bell to never miss another video from the Young Turks.